Okay, thank you. It's fantastic to see you all, and I hope we got a few things that are worth hearing. So this question, of course, do green buildings really stack up, is an extremely difficult question, and I will certainly not be able to do it fully justice in the 20 minutes that I have this morning. But I'm going to present to you some evidence and also to make some suggestions about how we might at least move towards this direction. So there are lots of reasons for doing sustainable design or green design. It might be that we are really concerned about climate change. It's a really good reason, or to reduce the use of resources, or to reduce the risk in our projects, to make them cheaper to run, to give a positive legacy to our children and to the future generations, and to make our spaces that we build more productive. I think personally that all those reasons are sufficient for designing green buildings. But today I want to ask the question why we are not really moving in the most part beyond simple building regulation compliant design. I think it's because there is a perception that building green or building sustainably costs more. And these are figures that have been bandied around for many years about the perception of the increasing cost of designing sustainable buildings. Is this true? And have we actually in time simply latched on to the idea that it does cost more, and therefore we've used this really as a reason to not move the industry on, or not to try to move it on, with a slight excuse, well, it costs more. So my premise for this morning's talk is that sustainable buildings need cost no more than non-sustainable buildings. And I'm going to try and give you a little bit of evidence and a few suggestions about why I think that is true. However, I'm not alone in that statement. Way back in 2007, Davis Langdon produced a report saying that there was no significant difference in average cost for green buildings as compared with non-green buildings. And also, in a recent report that was issued by the World Green Building Council, which many of you I hope have seen, and some of you I think have been part of, they concluded that research shows that building green does not necessarily need to cost more. So before we look at some evidence, let's look at some definitions of what I mean by the statement that sustainable buildings do not need to cost any more. So I define sustainability as a BREEAM or LEED rated with energy consumption 20% better than building regulations. Just my definition for the sake of this talk. I'm going to talk about buildings, but I'm going to concentrate on the commercial developer-led construction market. By cost, I mean the first cost. That is the capital cost of construction. I'm not going to go into life cycle or anything like this. I'm just talking about the first capital cost of construction. And by non-sustainable, I simply mean, for this exercise, code compliant. So sustainable buildings need cost no more than non-sustainable buildings. Of course, we actually have difficulty with how we measure this. And comparing sustainable and non-sustainable buildings is really difficult because we don't actually design something which is just code compliant, cost it, and then design a better solution. And so we get into the issue where often the only difference that we make is the add-on bits, which I think Michael Truesdale in a previous talk called the eco-bling. So we make the additional costs something that's easy to measure, something that is an add-on. But of course the right approach is much more difficult. It's to cost and to design the building as a whole, which is a much more difficult approach. So by way of evidence, I want to give you some statistics, and I've abstracted some of this information from this report by the World Green Building Council. This plot here shows along the bottom from 2000 to 2012, and up the side the increase in cost attributed to being a green building. All these buildings on this that are represented by these dots are accredited LEED or BREEAM or Green Star, and the two at the top are actually the platinum rating. So this graph shows that there is somewhere between 0 and an average of 4% increase in the cost for the certification of these buildings. However, if we abstract this graph a little bit and say, let's go to the next the next 2 years, this year and the next 2 years, and then seek to plot a regression line through that time, we can see that there has been a reduction in the cost of green building, and that projection looks like we're going to hit a zero cost. Either we have done so already with these examples or in the near future. So I think that there is probably a gap between what we think are, what we perceive and reality. And the question is, it seems to me that the evidence points to the fact that today it is certainly possible to design a sustainable building at no extra cost. One more set of statistics, or one more premise here, that sustainable buildings have more value than non-sustainable ones. In 2009, a comparison study of green buildings in America was conducted by the University of California Energy Institute. Now, they took a sample of 10,000 buildings across America, organized them into clusters of 12 buildings in the same location and at the same quality, where at least one in each of those clusters was energy rated, had a LEED rating or a Green Star, Energy Star rating. And they found that the energy efficient buildings commanded 3% extra in rent per square foot. They added 16% to the resale value of that property. And they also commanded, on average, 7% higher occupancy rates. So how can we achieve these sustainable, cost-neutral designs which add value to our projects? And what I would say, who wouldn't want to? I believe that the overriding prerequisite is integrated design, coming from a shared vision by all parties. Incidentally, just yesterday, I was watching a piece of film by Sir Ove Arup, the man. It was shot in 1966 by the BBC, and he said on that piece of film that the goal for good design was integration and a shared vision. So this is not new. This is quite old. Maybe we just need to keep rediscovering it. However, on many of our projects, the influence of different parties is unbalanced. This doesn't represent any particular thing, it just represents an idea of being unbalanced. So the unbalance prevents, I believe, holistic, sustainable design. And some projects might look like this. Different people having different levels of influence. On others, the design responsibility is uneven, leading to an overemphasis on the aspect, one aspect over another. And again, our design solutions become unbalanced. But when all parties have a shared vision at the beginning of a project, the result can be quite different. So, for example, let's look at facades of a typical commercial office building. I'm choosing facades to start with because they're a large percentage of the cost, and they're the biggest influence not only on the aesthetic, but on the energy performance of the building. So I've taken at random, really, 10 facade designs and plotted the cost across the bottom in pounds per square metre against the U value. We assume for this exercise that a lower U value means a better energy performance. We can see just in this very small sample, it'd be good to do a bigger sample sometime, that there is no correlation between cost and performance. And that's kind of what I expected when I put this together, and I think it's proved to be the case. So the most expensive facade here is the worst performing, and some of the cheaper facades are the best. So cost is not a barrier to having a good thermal performance. Again, if we look at some similar projects, this is the shading coefficient up the left-hand side. Again, cost per square metre. And again, here, there is no real correlation between a good facade that shades from the sun and one that and the cost. In fact, the two best examples are the extremes: the lowest cost and the most expensive in this small sample. So let's get all the parties round the table and set out the shared sustainable goals for the project. This is the white-collar factory, which I personally wasn't involved with, but I know that on this project, the developer, the engineer, the architect, and the QS all contributed to the whole in achieving this solution. And this has a low U value, facade of 1.2 watts per square metre, has an overall shading coefficient of less than 0.1, and it has a cost that's on the bottom of our range. It is possible with collaboration and shared design to achieve something that is better. Another example is lighting efficiency. We can balance the cost of solutions against their efficiency. Examples in a recent study which compared a fluorescent solution with an LED solution to achieve 400 lux in a commercial office building showed that the fluorescent solution was at 10 watts per square metre and the LED solution at 6.4 watts per square metre. But the fluorescent solution is £6 a square metre less. But let's see what it does when we consider the design as a whole. So this is just some loads on a perimeter office of a commercial building. And these are loads that are recommended in the BCO 2009 guidance document. So people in this 4.5 square metres at the edge of a building, 10 watts a square metres. Computers, 25, that's with the spare capacity put on. Lighting is recommended at 12 watts a square metre, And the facade, they recommend around about 60 watts a square metre. However, if we take our scenario, we need to keep the number of people there the same. We can't reduce their cooling load. But we can use the research that has shown that 15 watts per square metre is adequate for almost every situation. We can take our reduced lighting loads that we looked at if we went to LED at, say, 7 watts a square metre. And the facade, the best practice facade on my little graph there was about 40 watts a square metre. So that gives us a summation here of the cooling loads in the perimeter office. Now, the best practice solution gives us 1/3 of the overall cooling loads of the BCO guidance. A reduction of 1/3 rather than than 1/3. And what this means, of course, is that it is possible to do two things. One is to think in terms of a different air conditioning solution, which can be more energy efficient and lower cost. So we can maybe look at displacement or something like that as a solution once the loads become down at this level. But also, I estimate that the difference in cost between those two solutions is something like £30 a square metre. So our additional £6 a square metre for the lighting is more than offset when we look at the totality of the design. So, taking our fairly crude example of collaborative working, we can achieve a more efficient facade, a less energy-intensive lighting solution, which can result in a simpler and cheaper AC system. So if we can achieve this, I think that our green buildings will cost less and save more. It's a win-win situation for both developer and occupier. In order to make the best practice good practice, we need to move in the right direction. And this needs to happen at the beginning of the project. We need collaboration with an orchestrated and shared vision of what we want to achieve, and a buy-in from all parties. We need to be receptive to change. We don't want to have entrenched positions. All parties need to buy in to achieving these sort of goals. And we need to always consider the total project cost. Sustainable solutions are about integrated whole building design, and they need to have a whole building cost. We need also to collect more real data to see how well we're doing. And perhaps we need to discover a new aesthetic which makes these ambitions more possible to achieve. Thank you. So I'm sure you've got masses of questions.
Yes, what do we do about retrofit, and how do we get this to trickle down? Because the kind of projects that I kind of guess you were discussing were big new projects, but one of the problems we've got in this country is our existing stock of buildings, and it's also the fact that we've got this huge swathe of things like domestic projects where apparently the cost of doing green solutions does seem to be more expensive.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I premise by saying we're talking about the commercial market, basically, in London, and that was the premise of this. However, I think some of the solutions are equally applicable to retrofit. The idea of collaborative, integrated working to get the best solutions is clearly applicable in all types of circumstances. I think the domestic sector about the cost effectiveness of remedial measures is a real issue, and my view, for what it's worth, is that this is where regulation and government should actually step in to make it possible if we want to make a step change in that. But so I don't think, I mean, you can go so far with cost-effective solutions, and then you get to a point where you actually need to inject money into the system.
Your final slide talked about a new aesthetic, and I would just ask, what do you think we could all do to try and make this new aesthetic become real? Because I guess that was what it was all about, really, changing perceptions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, I think that you know, I don't lead on the aesthetics of a building. I'm not an architect. The architect has a real role in doing that and should lead on that area and needs to have the influence in that area. Otherwise, if I designed the facade of a building, it would look poor. Okay, so I need to. So it's about collaboration. But what I would urge people to do is to come from the basis of what do we need to do to achieve a more sustainable design, to achieve a very low shading coefficient, to achieve a good thermal performance, and see where that goes in terms of the aesthetic of the building, and see how we can do it better. Now, it may not generate much different than we're doing now. I don't know. I'm just postulating that perhaps we need to move away from some of the buildings that we've designed in the last few years, which some of them have been very energy efficient but not very cost effective. And maybe we need to look at best practice and see how we can move towards that within our design. And I just wonder whether a new aesthetic can emerge from those considerations. And maybe it is, maybe it has, and maybe that's already happening. Yeah.
What we found from Derwent is one of the major barriers is actually on the engineering side. The engineers who are working for the tenants, who are continuously pushing back on these on new alternative ways of cooling, where you have an integrated design, where you thought about the thermal performance of the facade and you've got systems like displacement air, or even at White Collar Factory, something completely different, where, you know, many engineers, obviously Arup not one of them, are advising tenants that actually, you know, they want more, they need more continuously, and we're constantly fighting this battle. So the industry is kind of talking with two voices on theme. You know, is pure science, but there's no one voice that the industry is speaking with, and when you have occupiers who aren't experts in the field, they look to their advisors, whether it's agents or engineers, and you continuously have this battle, and it would help to move everything forward if there was that common voice.
Well, you know, I think in the end it's getting those people into that circle, and however that might be, so that together we can actually demonstrate the benefits of doing this. I remember, and I see Graham is here, he will remember about 20 years ago that we designed a building in the city which had a different AC system than was common. And we actually did a whole load of road shows with all the agents in town to show them, and I gave speech after speech about the benefits and so on. And in the end, we convinced them that this was a good thing and a good value. So I think, you know, to move the market is always difficult. You know, the market is slow moving. People don't like to change because with change there is risk. And so it's about education, it's about demonstration, it's about doing the statistics, getting the feedback, finding out what is there, and you know, being able to articulate well the benefits of moving in a certain direction. And I don't think there's a shortcut or easy answer.
Yeah, in terms of your definition of green buildings, I've just been involved in a study looking at the realised performance of something like 50 green buildings in practice.
Okay.
There's, in quite a few of them, there's a fair performance gap between the, if you like, the design intent and what you get out in practice.
Yeah.
Number of reasons for this, one of which is that people who specify BREEAM don't always use it as an integrated, or at least adopt an integrated approach. Sometimes they go for the added points, and you end up with technologies which are bolted on and don't actually perform in use. Sometimes things are added in to meet the planning requirements, and again it's a kind of a bolt-on added goodie. And in that sense, I just sort of what your views are as to whether you perhaps need to have a slightly more defined definition of a green building.
Yes.
So it's not just...
No, I think there's two things. The definition that I put up there was simply because it's something that we can imagine now when we're considering stats for green buildings. But what I would say strongly, and I continually say this in design meetings and to my clients, my architects, is that assessment methods are not design tools. And assessment methods are simply a way of scoring the marks of what you've achieved when you've achieved it. So I would strongly recommend not designing to particular codes of BREEAM or LEED or whatever they might be, but designing in an integrated, holistic, whole manner as we've talked about. And then the assessment method is a useful way of having a standard within the industry that is comparable. So I'm not against them, but I definitely do not think they should be used as design tools. So when you say, well, I want to have a little bit of this on it because I need to get an extra point, that really, we should be there without doing that. Now, I know there are circumstances where that's worth doing, but I think, generally speaking, it's about holistic, integrated design, looking at the building as a whole, rather than simply adding the bits and pieces up.
Yeah, I thought it was absolutely spot on. I think it's a crucial point, and actually a crucial time in developing buildings to come up with ever more energy efficient programs. The key about collaboration is probably the most important one. Always was and always will be.
I thought it was really interesting, very factual, good to be based on actual evidence and performing buildings, and sort of gives people who are working on green buildings a little bit of hope. We've got a few projects at the moment that are specifically advocating green principles. I'm working on one that's looking to meet government targets of 2050 at the moment. So it's definitely in the pipeline and something we're trying to take through the entire portfolio.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting talk. A lot of what he said chimes with what we at the Low Carbon Workplace have been working on for the last 4 or 5 years. And the integrated approach from design all the way through to occupancy to minimise the performance loss that each transition in that process is, I think, absolutely essential to developing a low carbon building stock that will allow the UK to meet its 2050 targets.
I thought Alistair was talking a lot of sense, and it's really good to hear. What a fantastic career, and some really good learning has come out of it. And I just wish that actually a lot more of that good stuff was more widespread in the industry, and so that we didn't have to fight the unending battles every time with maybe other engineers and advisors and agents and people, occupiers who aren't necessarily experts in the field, but they look to their advisors. And we have the same old conversations that occupiers sometimes are being ill-advised to demand the maximum performance from all sorts of different systems in the buildings, and it's not really a way forward in sustainability terms, because what we're trying to do is actually build buildings that are far more energy efficient, far more sustainable in that holistic, integrated way, and that requires not only the designers and the people who supply the buildings, but it also means that actually the people who come and demand and use the buildings need to be all part of the same thinking, and that's really what I hope, and somehow we need to engender that and educate more. But that, it's an inspiring talk for that.
It was great. I think this kind of event is very positive thing to be doing, and essential in kicking things off and really engaging with people across a much broader spectrum than has already taken place to date. As a practice, we're generally looking at understanding metrics, costs and values, and it's something that as an industry people really need to step up to and focus on a lot more. There are lots of good reasons for making green moves, some of which we touched on today. But the financial side of things, it's found on the continent and in Europe, can be a really big driver, and is something that we can use to drive better solutions all the way through the process.